Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the India International Center, I extend a very, very warm welcome to all of you and the distinguished panelists this evening for a very, very significant and special occasion for the IIC today, and that is a book discussion on the biography of a great, a doyen in a field, most respected and revered personage, Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan ji. Kapila Vatsyayan, a cognitive biography, Afloat, a Lotus Leaf. The book is by Jyoti Sabharwal. I'll just give a brief introduction on the distinguished panelist after I read about the author. And of course, everybody will be talking about Kapilaji, so that privilege is not with me today. Everybody else is going to talk. Jyoti Sabharwal, with 3 decades of celebrity writing behind her, she commenced her career as a journalist after an honors and a master's in English literature from Indraprastha College, Delhi, and a diploma in journalism from Dateline Delhi in 1981. She has held positions as chief correspondent of Celebrity magazine, chief of Delhi bureau of 5 magazines, that is Society, Savvy, Showtime, Parade, Island, senior contributor with Newstrack, and with a streak for travel, did foreign travel assignment for Destination Traveler, traversing various destinations like Moscow, Tashkent, Phuket, Paris, Singapore, etc. She diversified into the realm of publishing and took over as the commissioning editor of Sterling Publishers in 1996. During this tenure, she brought out some significant titles, notable being India at 50, Bliss of Hope and Burden of Reality, The 50th Milestone, a Feminine Critique, K. Natwar Singh's Profiles and Letters, Kiran Bedi's It's Always Possible, and many others. She set up a new publishing house, Stellar, in April 2004, aspiring to break fresh grounds in quality publishing in the world of literature, translated works, corporate biographies, memoirs and autobiographies of some of the best known achievers in the country in the arena of art, culture, politics, cinema and sports. The panelists today, Dr. Harish Trivedi. Dr. Harish Trivedi was a professor in the Department of English, Delhi University, Delhi. Professor Trivedi is a well-known scholar of post-colonialism and translation studies. He has authored Colonial Transactions, English Literature and India, and has co-edited The Nation Across the World, Post-Colonial Literary Representations, Literature and Nation, Britain and India, 1800 to 1990, Post-Colonial Translation, Theory and Practice. He was a visiting professor, University of Chicago, USA, visiting professor, School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, 2002-3. He was also the Commonwealth Scholar, University of Wales, Honorary Research Fellow, University of Birmingham, UK, Visiting International Scholar, University of Georgia, USA. Professor Trivedi was Secretary 1993 to 99 and Vice President of the Indian Association of Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies, Vice Chair of the International Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies. He has delivered lectures at the University of California, Berkeley, the University of Georgia at Athens. Okay. Shri Om Cheriyanan Pillai is the Honorary Director of Bharatiya Vidya Bhawan. He is also the Principal of Bhavan's postgraduate Sardar Patel College of Communication and Management, Formerly, he was with the Indian Information Service. Also, he was professor and course director of Indian Institute of Mass Communication before he joined Bhavan's Postgraduate College of Communication and Management. Professor Omchari Pillai is an eminent Malayali playwright, author of 9 full-length plays and more than 60 one-act plays. He has been honored by Kerala Sahitya Academy with the Academy Award for his plays and also Lifetime Contribution Award to Malayalam language and literature. Shri Krishnan Raghunath. Shri Krishnan Raghunath was a former foreign secretary and ambassador to Russia, Philippines. Shri Raghunath graduated from Madras University with a BSc Honours degree in Physics and Mathematics. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1962, where he served in various capacities in India and abroad. He served as the Foreign Secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs from 1997 to 99. He is also a graduate of the National Defence College, New Delhi, and served as a member of the National Security Advisory Board, Government of India, for several years during the latter part of his career. Coming to Mrs. Leela Venkataraman, a writer and commentator on dance for the last 35 years. Leela ji has been a regular contributor to dailies like the National Herald, Patriot, and then the Hindu, for which she was the weekly dance columnist for over 30 years. She is also a regular contributor to Shruti, a monthly journal on classical music and dance published from Chennai, and Nartanam, a dance quarterly published in Hyderabad. She has also contributed to foreign journals like Prof, published in UK, and she has authored many books. Today's discussion is being chaired by His Excellency Shri N.N. Vohra.
The word excellency is gone away now.
Okay, sir. I'm sir. Shri N.N. Vohra. Sir, nonetheless, it's a privilege to have you here to chair the discussion. And over to you, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You've been subjected to a rather extensive introductory session introducing the distinguished panelists. Personally, I believe that all the panelists are so well known that they don't need long introductions. The author of the book, I'm told by the director, had left home some times ago, but the vagaries of the traffic movements and so on have caught us somewhere on the way. I mentioned in her absence that before we talk about the person biographed, the book is very well written, with care, sensitivity, and a lot of work has apparently gone into it. Well researched, well put together, makes good reading. I congratulate Jyoti Sabharwal, who's not here. Now we have, fortunately with us this evening, several personalities who would be speaking on the book, on Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. And I would not like to transgress or preempt what they are likely to say or what they would wish to say in the coming time. However, I think it would be worthwhile to quickly go over the contents of this fairly large volume. What this book is all about is much more than on Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan. If you read it page to page, cover to cover, it brings out the spirit of the times, when she was born, when she went to school, early childhood, her roots and context in Kashmir, how she moves on to a different schooling regime because of change of geography and circumstance. A subsequent career as a student studying in Delhi University, then going abroad, coming back, picking up service. All this takes us through a fairly long period of post-freedom India. Dr. Vatsyayan has been more than occasionally referred to as the culture Zarina of India, culture czar of India, if you don't distinguish the gender. And often quoted and referred to when it comes to questions of art and culture and education. Needless to say, she's an extremely versatile person, not merely because I've happened to know her and work with her. Dancer, an artist, thinker, scholar, author, writer, rare, exceptional personality, to put it very briefly. Her period of education, that phase in Delhi University, some very interesting stories are there. Hindu College and Stevens College, and what is the correlation between girl students and boy students and so on. And what if you were caught talking to a boy? Delhi to Michigan, Michigan to Banaras, covers a long span. She was a topper in English honors. She questioned the teachers, received kudos all around, medals for her merit and scholarship. In the arena of non-formal education, Dr. Vatsyayan had the privilege and the good luck of having the opportunity to recite poetry before no less than Rabindranath Tagore and learn how to hold a painting brush under the tutelage of no less than Nandlal Bose. So what I said in the beginning, ladies and gentlemen, that we are here this evening discussing the life and times of a very exceptional person. Not merely BA Honours MA in Michigan, but she specialized in learning Kathak and Manipuri in the hands of some of the best, most eminent gurus in the arena of dance. She experimented with other forms, even some forays into modern dance forms. Now it's difficult to cover the entire span of Dr. Vatsyayan's career and service career in life. But I would say that she was one of the rarely privileged persons, that she worked during a period which saw the dominance of great intellectuals, great names in the arena of culture. It was an environment of freedom, environment of ideas and ideologies, an environment in which there was keenness to rediscover Indian history, to rediscover cultural roots and traditions, enlarging the awareness of the millions who had become free. It was at that time that Dr. Vatsyayan grew up as a scholar, earned a name for herself. Consequent to her formal completion of studies, which really never happened, she was engaged in an important assignment in the Ministry of Education, which one of the important components was the Department of Culture. So she had a hand in the evolution of national policies, educational policies, cultural policies, in the planning and building establishment of institutions of higher learning for both for advancement of education and culture. And as I said earlier, she had the rare privilege of again working with some of the most historical names in our country, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad, Dr. Radhakrishnan, all of whom had deep and serious involvement with the then Ministry of Education. Such great names, we have not had the occasion to see people of this caliber after the end of that phase. Dr. Vatsyayan contributed a great deal to the evolution of cultural policy, of the advancement of culture, and in a manner of speaking, she was one of the first in the generation of those who laid the basis of cultural diplomacy, what in subsequent years we found for ourselves large number of bilateral agreements with various countries between India and others in the arena of cultural relations. So over the years, Dr. Vatsyayan emerged, not now, but many years ago, as the leading authority, leading living authority in the arena of arts of India, anthropology, archaeology, archives, museums, whatever you can think of, she was associated with in this vast arena of cultural renaissance that we witnessed in the early years after we attained freedom. Having been with her in the India International Center for many years, I would go to the extent of saying, though the book does bring out, but to the extent it does not, I would add that Dr. Vatsyayan's work has also interconnected Indian culture, Indian cultural traditions, opening the door to connectivity with the Western arts, Western culture. In the ministry where she worked, she was an education advisor. She was associated with the Sangeet Natak Academy. She was secretary of the Department of Arts when it was set up. It's unfortunate that the department wasn't allowed to continue to exist thanks to the games that we play. Subsequently, she was the academic director of the IGNCA, one of the foremost institutions at the national level. She was and continues to be a life trustee of ISC, has been a former president. In the international arena, she was secretary to the delegation to UNESCO, and in more recent years, she was a member of the executive board of UNESCO. And as I said earlier, she has been writing and speaking copiously for long years on various aspects of art and culture in India. And for good reason, she is looked upon as the doyen and as the final word in some areas of specialization, arts, dance, theatre, folk theatre. And amongst the many books she has written, is an 8-volume on Geet Govinda. As editor of the Asia project in this institution, even though she had constraints of visual impairment, she's brought out some of the best books I have seen in recent times. If anybody is seriously interested in our civilizational past, in comparative studies, in cultural comparative studies, she has brought out those books in the last 15 years. Now, before I hand over to the panelists, because we spent a lot of time, I would say from my proximity to her in past years, that besides all the great work she has done, the great people she has worked with, it is the influence of certain human beings with whom she worked, or rather under whose tutelage she grew up. Great personalities in the arena of culture, great intellectuals, Aruna Asaf Ali, Kamala Chattopadhyay, Aruna Dale, Grace Morley and others with whom she got into contact in subsequent years. All of them influenced her ideas, her ideologies, her personal philosophy, her views on gender, the role of women in India, empowerment of women in India. I've heard the views from time to time. This is greatly influenced by these several ladies that I have named. Finally, I close by saying that as if honors and awards are the only thing to judge a person by, she has received and been honored at home and abroad by dozens of institutions. In our own hierarchical sense, she received the Padma Shri many years ago, and more recently she was bestowed the Padma Vibhushan. After having been president of the IIC, she was nominated to the Rajya Sabha, which is a great credit and great honor. And among the many medals that she has received in the last 40, 50 years, I would particularly mention the honor done to her by UNESCO, the Madame Curie Medal, Mahatma Gandhi Medal, the Cultural Diversity Medal. I think some of these honors are amongst the best that she has received in the last half a century and more. I shall stop here and apologize for having spoken at such length, but I thought I needed to do that because A, I have worked in this institution for many years. B, I have worked with Dr. Vatsyayan during periods good, during periods which were not good, in fact very bad, from various angles, various perspectives. So I claim to have known her and know her. So with these words, I will quickly now jump over to the more meaningful part of our meeting here today. You can entirely ignore what I said. I now come to Professor Harish Trivedi, who is not only a very renowned former professor of English, a scholar known in India and abroad, but who would also be able to tell us certain insightful things, because Madam Vatsyayan was in English. Here you are, sir.
Thank you, Vohra. It is a matter of great honor and privilege for me to be invited to speak in this panel. There are any number of us who could fill any of these slots and do equally well or even better, and I'm conscious of that privilege. Having said that polite thing, let me now say something rude. Kapilaji has been the source of making my life miserable for the last 5 or 6 or 7 years in a major way. He says, I'm not the only one. already we've got a reality check. Yeah. This is a standing joke between Kapilaji and me. Last week there was a book launch here in IIC. And she and I both presented our different versions of how she's made my life miserable. In the year 2004, there was a conference on transnational literature in Stockholm. And she and your humble servant were the 2 participants invited from India. And when I got there, I found that she had not turned up. So I had the joy of presenting 2 papers, my own, and a slightly better paper, or much better paper by her. On the Geet Govindam it was, and this reminds me to mention that a project to which she had dedicated her life in so many ways over the last 30, 35 years came to fruition, magnificent fruition, when her multimedia DVD on the Geet Govindam was launched at the Indira Gandhi National Center only a few weeks ago. Her achievements keep multiplying. This was a tremendous achievement on the part of anyone, perhaps the best study of any Sanskrit text in its multidimensional aspects that has been attempted by any scholar. There have been greater scholars of literary texts, but for her to take in paintings and music and the literary text and to put it all together in the way she has done is unparalleled. So anyhow, after that, that transnational conference turned itself into a project to write a history of world literature. And because she wasn't there, the finger of fate pointed at me. I wish it had pointed at her, so that there would be another magnificent achievement coming from her after the Gita Govindam. Kapila ji, when this book arrived, now that the biographer has arrived, let me state some plain home truths about the book. When the book arrived, my heart sank. Not only because it's long, but also because I had not read a biography like this for a very long time. It has no footnotes, it has no references, it has no bibliography, it has no index. It's a 550-page book, and so many people are mentioned in it that if there were an index, just a name index, it would add another 50 pages to the book. Maybe that's the reason it doesn't have a name index. But apart from that, the title, that I had to stop at the title, Kapila Vatsyayan, a cognitive biography. I've come across many subtitles for biographies, but not this one. What is a cognitive biography? I checked a couple of dictionaries. Being a professor, I'm fond of dictionaries, but there was no immediate éclaircissement. So I said, all right, let me get on, and perhaps light would dawn later. And I have made a list of other places where the word cognitive is used, and I'll put them together and perhaps write a paper on this new use of cognitive. Afloat, a lotus leaf. Very poetic, but I'm sorry, English teachers are very pernickety. Where's the grammar? Afloat, a lotus leaf. It needs one word more, I think, a preposition somewhere. Anyhow, one gets the sense, one gets the philosophical sense of what is being said. So I started reading the book in that kind of a frame of mind, but let me tell you, within the first 5 or 10 pages, the book had me by the throat. It is one of the most engaging, one of the most absorbing, and altogether one of the most enchanting biographies that I have read. All my little quibbles melted away into thin air in no time at all. Jyoti ji has achieved a feat which in my reading experience is very rare indeed. And that is, she has almost vanished into thin air herself as a biographer. The book is so deeply steeped in Kapilaji that we see the world from Kapilaji's point of view. We hear Kapilaji's voice, and all the fascinating incidents that are narrated in the characteristic mode that we associate with Kapilaji. This is the kind of an artistic triumph to write a 550-page book, a full account of her life, which is so utterly transparent. It's not easy to achieve that kind of artistic transparency. And that is one of the great joys of reading this biography. One impression, we all know Kapilaji to the extent that we've been fortunate to know her. But this book tells us so much more about Kapilaji, so much more, that all of us will end up feeling that we have only known the tip of the iceberg so far, personally. Her achievements are so vast and they're so widespread, and they range across so many fields. It's almost inconceivable that one person has been doing all this so busily, so actively, so fruitfully over such a long period. She seems to have been everywhere. She seems to have started so many great institutions or been associated with them as an institution builder, changed their very conception and shape, even if she did not start them. It's astounding. On this panel, there are some of us who are supposed to, informally, I think, speak about her contribution to art, and some to culture, and some to other areas. To my share falls literature. So I'll confine myself to that. Except by reminding you again that she is not only about literature. There is a saying in Sanskrit, Sahitya Sangeeta Kala Vihina. Anybody who's bereft of Sahitya and Sangeet and Kala is Sakshat Pashuha Puchya Vishanahina. Is like a beast, is like an animal without horns and without a tail. Kapila ji has multiple sets of horns and tails of literature, Kala, Sahitya Kala and Sangeet. By this reckoning, she is all these things incarnate almost. She has a fellowship with the Sangeet Natak Academy, she has a fellowship with the Lalit Kala Academy, and if she does not yet have a fellowship with the Sangeet of the Sahitya Academy, I think they have been very remiss, and they will very soon redress that. So about literature, the first claim to literature, to us fellow literature wallahs that we have on Kapila ji is that she did an MA in English literature from Miranda House, and she began teaching there. Being a student is one thing, it's another altogether. Vohra Sahib was telling me about his teaching experiences early in his career. That's quite another. Then you find out that you know nothing unless you begin to teach. So Kapila ji did that as well. And then, over the last 2 decades or so, the Delhi University and many other universities have redefined English literature. It's not only strictly English literature, it's a number of other things as well. It's all literature in the world accessible to us through the global language English. And it was a hard battle to fight, to win this, to have a new syllabus in place. I am astonished to find that Kapila ji in the year 1948 had already worked out her personal salvation out of English literature into a much wider conception of English literature that nobody else was even dreaming about at that time. In this book, we are told how Richard II and the Romantics, etc., were required reading in her MA and required teaching by her when she began to teach. What did she add on to that? To name only 2 texts that she worked on, that she made her own, the Natya Shastra and the Geet Govindam. This combination is extremely rare. And to move on from one to the other, as I said, entirely out of one's own initiative and volition, is a stupendous achievement 70 years ago, almost. So this is the range of what she means by literature, what she understands by literature. Not only knowing Natya Shastra, but adding to our understanding of it. There are 2 chapters in this book in particular, which I'm very fond of, which I think are at the heart of the book in so many ways. And one is the chapter about her stay in Banaras, where after coming back from Michigan, she went to do a PhD under Acharya Vasudev Sharan Agarwal. The galaxy, the intellectual galaxy at Banaras at that time, Vasudev Sharan Agarwal, next door Hazari Prasad Trivedi, Rai Krishnadas, Mahamahopadhyay Kaviraj Gopinath, Dr. Moti Chandra, any number of people who made original and seminal contribution to our understanding of Indian culture, whom she sat at the feet of, as she says repeatedly in this book. It is a kind of a galaxy we can't even imagine now, as Vohra Sahib was saying. And she got the best of them, and she combined it into something of her own. And they were tough teachers, all of them. Her supervisor for PhD, Vasudev Sharan Agarwal, would be listening, lying down on a takhat to her paper, to what she had written, and with eyes closed. And then suddenly he'd open his eyes and say, कितनी गलत बात तुमने कही है, कितनी महामूर्खता की बात कही है, and so on. This is what's cited in the book. And by the time she's finished or has proceeded with her work, she has pointed out something in the Natya Shastra, which is how expression depends also on which part of the foot you touch the ground with first. the toes or the heel or the middle. And Vasudev Sharan Agarwal says to her, 35 साल से मैं भी लगा हुआ हूं, लेकिन मैंने तो नहीं देखा था ये. तुमने विभोर कर दिया. You've thrilled me to bits. You caused me great joy. So that's the kind of journey she describes. And one amazing thing that we find is she is always, nearly always, in the role of a shishya to all the great teachers. We don't associate that with her because in these latter years we have known her as a very formidable person, as herself in the position of a guru to so many. So to recall that questing spirit on her part is a thrilling experience in itself. The other chapter that I liked very much has Maulana Azad as the hero, the first education minister. Yeah. And I think, I don't know how to put it, there was a really special bond between that utterly enlightened and scholarly education minister, the first in independent India, and Kapilaji, who was young and had just joined the ministry and served under him, and several other successive education ministers. He insisted, the three academies, Maulana Azad insisted that we should not spell the word academy in the British way, but in the Arab Greek way. And they're still spelled like that, Akademi. And Kapilaji once, in a note that she put up, misspelled that word in the usual English way. And the Maulana sent back a note in Urdu saying, Kapila se kaha jaye कि ये लफ्ज सही स्पेलिंग के साथ वो 100 बार लिख के भेजे. And Kapilaji did that as if she were a schoolgirl sitting at the feet of Maulana Azad. I mean, one can't imagine that kind of a relationship now, and the warmth of personal feeling that would make one person ask it and the other oblige immediately without any quibble. It's amazing. You know, she says she has three mothers. Her own mother, of course, and Rukmini Devi and Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. She's also had three fathers, though she doesn't put it quite like that, or more than three perhaps. Pandit Nehru and Radhakrishnan, and of course Maulana Azad. And she ever so, Zarina is an adjective that stuck with her. There's no hint of at all of that kind of thing in her personality throughout this book. She depicts herself through Jyoti as always being at the receiving end. Mahamurkha bhi hai, 100 baar academy bhi lig rahi hai, vagara vagara. This is true modesty, as recalled by herself at this stage of her career as marking her whole career. This is not only a book which narrates her life. This is the book that narrates the cultural history of modern India, as Vohra Sahib was saying, over the last 60 or 70 years, in a vivid, personal and buoyant kind of way, in a way that comes alive rather than being a scholarly tome on that period. Finally, let me mention my magic moment in this book. This takes place on top of a mountain far away from India, in Hawaii. They have gone, 4 of them, to the mountaintop in the dark to watch the sunrise. It's very windy. They are holding on to each other. It's so windy. And finally the sun rises. And there is a whole expanse of orchids before them. And the sun rises. And there's the sea, of course. And the sky and the sea are equally golden and indistinguishable in this description. And there are 4 of them. Dr. S.K. Saxena, Professor of Philosophy at Hindu College, who had taught Kapilaji. Professor Dayakrishna, one of the most eminent philosophers of modern India. Kapilaji, and a man called S.H. Vatsyayan. And all of them spontaneously burst into reciting the creation hymn from the Rig Veda. This is even better than Oppenheimer. This is such a thrilling moment and such a culmination of our shared heritage 4 people on a mountaintop in Hawaii reciting together in one voice the creation hymn from the Rig Veda. This book gives a wonderful account of Kapilaji, but not of Vatsyayan, the other part of the name. This Vatsyayan and Kapilaji were married, and then they parted company. Vatsyayan was the best modern poet in Hindi, and also perhaps he's regarded commonly as the second best novelist in Hindi ever after Premchand. 2 supremely attractive people and 2 supremely, sublimely gifted people. But there's not much about that in this book, and we are not the ones to ask or to miss it. वो बात सारे फसाने में जिसका जिक्र न था, उसका जिक्र नहीं हो तो अच्छा है, बेहतर है, और जितना है उसके लिए कितनी कृतज्ञता हम लोग व्यक्त करें कपिला जी के प्रति और ज्योति सबरवाल के प्रति. ज्योति जी, आपने और कपिला जी आपने तो अवश्य ही विभोर कर दिया. थैंक यू.
Now you would realize, ladies and gentlemen, why I didn't want to go into details, because Professor Trivedi has his own insights, not only as a man of letters in English, but his long past association with Dr. Vatsyayan. I would now call upon Madam Leela Venkataraman.
For one who has grown up educating herself on art by reading books written by Kapila Vatsyayan, it's rather difficult and intimidating to talk about a person like this. But I will try. The first thing that struck me, as Harish Trivedi was saying, was this cognitive biography. I thought cognitive probably referred to a search for knowledge through thoughts, through experience, through the senses. And since Kapilaji's life has been a search for knowledge right through, she felt the book should be called a cognitive biography, because I think these are Kapilaji's words. I can't think of Jyoti Sabharwal using these words. I've heard Kapilaji use these words very often. And while I was reading this very large book, right through, to me it seemed as if it was Kapilaji who was talking to me. And I think that is the most successful part of this entire biography. Because when you read a biography, you want to get a feel of the person who is being written about. And I think that comes out very strongly in the book, to the extent that I felt there were parts which were written by Kapilaji herself. Now, Kapilaji was born, I think, at a very exciting time in the history of India, when there were 2 parallel movements going on all over. One, of course, was the search for freedom. The other was the search for one's cultural identity, submerged under years of British rule. Now, these 2 were parallel movements. I don't think they ever met, excepting occasionally. And Kapilaji could absorb all the images which came out of these 2 movements, because she came from a family that gave her the background to be able to take all this in. She talks about the mother. The mother is discussed in this book, and I know for a fact that Kapilaji was very close to her mother. And a matriculate who wore several hats with distinction. She was an active social reformer. She was a freedom fighter. She was a writer. she was a musician, she was several things rolled into one. And she also started a school in Kashmir, her parents having come from Punjab to settle there. And in that school, a non-sectarian, non-parda school in those years, you can imagine how independent-minded the family was. Kapila ji grew up. And I think the words of the father are mentioned, that he doesn't leave behind any great fortune for the children, but the great fortune is in allowing their minds to evolve to such an extent that he hopes they will utilize their intelligence intelligently in the future. And that is the great wealth which the children will get. Look at Kapila ji's reading habits even as a young person. She reads Tagore, of course. She was in contact with Tagore. Kalidas, Shakespeare, writings of French and Soviet writers, Shilappadikaram, Manimegale, the great Tamil classics. I mean, anything you mention, Sanskrit. And I think this eclectic mindset which had already been developed gave her the kind of background that was necessary to absorb the different types of images emerging, some very contrasting. And she never got confused, because there are two incidents which are mentioned in this book, and I think they're very important. One is when she was talking to Mahamahopadhyaya, and in Benares. No, I think this was when he was working with her in IGNCA, Acharya Vasudev. She said, "Hum hamesha raat din, sukh dukh." I mean, we always use these opposites when we are talking. Why is it? And he said, "Dvand nahi mithun hai." Because that is our philosophy. We always talk about two sides of a coin, and the two opposites are not looked upon as polarities, but as one enriching the identity of the other. Because of one, the other gets richer. And if one doesn't exist, the other also doesn't exist. Now this, I think I can see in all her attitude to the art images that she has absorbed. When she was young, she started off with her own dance. And when Achan Maharaj saw her doing her own dance for the first time, he said that what it lacked was a vocabulary of technique. And she started learning from Achan Maharaj. Then came Amubi Singh, the wonderful Manipuri guru. When she went down to the south, she saw Bala Saraswati, the great person who had come from the Devadasi family. Her grandmother being one of the greatest veena players that Carnatic music has ever produced. And when she saw that natural flow, abhinaya coming out of this person, it was an experience which she is never able to forget. And every time she talks about abhinaya, she says, Bala. There's nobody to come anywhere near Bala. But at the same time, while Bala was being seen, there was another movement that was going on. And that was neoclassical movement, when people like Rukmini Devi were restructuring the form to give it a certain newness for the proscenium situation. And Bharatanatyam got institutionalized. And she saw the very self-conscious, very correct attention to lines and geometry, something very different. It didn't have the tone of the Devadasi dance, but they were both going on simultaneously. And she says that both of them were equally rich, and they both had made a tremendous impact on her. Again, it was neoclassicism, I suppose, the attempts that were being made in Kerala when she went there to Kalamandalam. And she saw Ravunni Menon and Vallatol trying to do something with Kathakali, because Kathakali groups were not getting any support. And Kathakali probably would have gone downhill and disappeared, but for the great attempt of these two people who culled the best out of all the styles that existed and made Kathakali what it is today. When she saw all this, she saw the neoclassical, she saw the classical, and she also saw the Bhagavata Mela Natakam, which is completely different in tone. During Narasimha Jayanti, this is done, and this shows the killing of the Narasimha killing Hiranyakashipu. And this is done in a particular way in certain places in South India, particularly in Melathur. She saw that also. Now, here was one area in India and one classical form which had so many different manifestations, and you were seeing it in different forms. Then what about the new dance that was taking place in India? Uday Shankar, we can't call him really a modern dancer because what he did perhaps was really for a Western audience. But the Oriental dance that he came out with was very spectacular, and for the first time I think Indian dance was being seen abroad. But people like Prabhat Ganguly and then Shanti Bardhan. Shanti Bardhan was really a genius. And the kind of work that he did, she saw that also. She absorbed that also. And everything for her had its place, had its importance. And she didn't think that one vetoed the other. They were all part of rich India, plural India, and this is what India was. Then she went to the West. And in the West, when she was staying with Rudolf von Lehmann himself, can you imagine him and his daughter? And she learned the Laban notation method and how they looked at the body. Now, when she learned all this, she didn't think it was something that negated her knowledge of Indian dance. That was a kind of an additional tool that she acquired. She came back and she started looking at Indian dance, applying some of those things that she had learned there. And I can tell you that the books I have read by her, telling you about how the body is used in all the dance forms in India, I have been able to get much more than I have got from any teacher anywhere in this country. Then she went to Hanya Holm, Mary Wigman. She learned something about the Martha Graham technique. Then all these, the East, the West, they were not supposed to be something which made her feel that they were different, of course, but they existed at the same time, and each had its own place. You have spoken about her days in Banaras. I think those were extraordinary days. She had such a hard taskmaster as Acharya ji as her teacher, and he would give her 500 photographs and say, arrange these chronologically. And it was that found out that you could find out what particular period a certain photograph taken belonged to by looking at the way in which the feet were placed. Till then, nobody had discovered that. She was the one who found out the placings of the feet, not only in terms of abhinaya, but also to be able to chronologically determine which period the particular photograph belonged to. This is the best way of doing it, by looking at the feet. So everything she has written on the Natya Shastra is something extraordinary and something which one would like to read to understand the text better. Now, the other story that has been mentioned in this book is her asking His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, about shunyata. And he told her emptiness. He said, meditate on emptiness. And when you reach a state of non-self, you will realize that you only see interconnections. So there's no such thing as emptiness. Emptiness is a positive attitude. It will show connections, interconnections. And nothing in this world lives by itself. It always has its connections. And she went to the south to see all the temples. And in these temple towns, whether it was at Kumbakonam, or the Sarangapani temple, whether it was the Nataraja temple in Chidambaram, or whether it was the Brihadishwara temple in Tanjavur, everywhere she saw temple towns where everything was interconnected. The music, the dance, the poetry, the ritual, And I think for an Arya Samaj person, ritual assumed a special importance when she saw that the significance of ritual and what it really meant is something which began to be understood by her in detail at that particular time. So this togetherness of facts and the fact that differences, contrasting attitudes will exist, but they are complementary and they don't go against, they're not antagonistic to each other. These are the two things in her approach to art. And when she came back from Michigan to India, she had, of course, the great Maulana with whom she worked, and along with Pandit Nehru, these were the only two people who understood that art in India, or culture in India, was very important. And in a military parade, it was Panditji who asked her to think of a float. The cultural parade became part of the military parade. This is something, this is a combination which you don't find anywhere else in the world. And she always wished that culture should be a part of education. But in the Macaulay system, we have completely separated culture from education. And today's children, even if they understand something of art, they don't understand its intricacies. The only other person I've seen discuss art the way she does is Komalda, late Komalda. He would take a piece of thread and he would give the history of a whole tribe. And similarly, Kapilaji, she will talk about one thing like embroidery, and it's as if she's discussed the whole cosmos, because one thing leads to another, to another, to another, and before you know what she's doing, every discipline has been covered. Of course, it's been said already that she was connected with all the big institutions which have come up in this country. And she had her problems with bureaucracy all the time, because bureaucracy cannot see these things. They have been brought up in a different way under the Macaulay system, and they tend to look at administration in a very different way. But when the IGNCA came up, I think it was an extraordinary institution with Kapilaji heading it. Because for the first time, we were trying to understand India on its own terms and going into great details. It was not events. It was not a question of having a dance recital or a music recital or having an exhibition showing something. No, it was find out the togetherness of things. How from one to the other you find out things. And the tremendous work she has done with regard to Sanskrit, which many people say that it's a dead language, but if you really want to understand the essence of Indian art forms, you have to go to Sanskrit texts. There is no question. However much people may think that it's an elitist language and not important today. And the other thing she has worked on is Buddhism. That has fascinated her, because she has seen the spread and she has seen how many countries come together. And I think even the Asian program that she's connected with now, Buddhism forms a very great link. And she did a lot of work here, and that is, she's particularly close to the Dalai Lama. The Nalanda University, she did a lot of work there because it was not easy. And a lot of people who believed that only Sanskrit should be there and Buddhism studies were not necessary had to change their minds. And the experiment, I think, it was more than an experiment. The experience of IGNCA was something extraordinary. Unfortunately, before she could complete it, she was asked to go. And this book, I think, very strongly tells you how cultural institutions are managed in this country. Can they always be made the handmaiden of politics? Can we keep politics out of these cultural institutions? We have seen this happen in every institution. I've seen it happen in Kalakshetra. You find it doing very well, and suddenly the person is removed and somebody else comes in, and the whole thing just falls. Every institution this is happening. How do we allow these art institutions to flourish, to really become places where India is discovered in its entirety, where we begin to understand what we were, from where we have come and how we have progressed to this point. I think this is one very important thing which comes out in the book very strongly, and I'm very happy about that. As I said, it was very often like listening to Kapilaji talk when I went through this book. And I felt sad very often that we don't have politicians like Radhakrishnan, like Pandit Nehru, like Maulana Azad, who can have that kind of relationship with people who are working in administration, cultural administration. Those days, I think, are gone. And it's very sad. But I hope a time will come when we will all realize that cultural India is the only India which will give you a feel of the heart of India. And if that goes along with the scholastic study, then only would we have people who grow up knowing the real country. And she has seen, I was talking about opposite attitudes. In Banaras, she runs into the great Dagar Bandhu, and the way they sang on the great Indian gods and deities. And Bismillah Khan Sahib, who was supposed to go to Mecca and Medina, and he said, I can't do that till I play before Vishwanath ji ke pehle, bajakar, what is it called? नहीं नाद नहीं. It is, yeah. जब तक विश्वनाथ के सामने नौबत नहीं बजाऊंगा तो जन्नत कैसे जाऊं. I mean, there were people like that where the music was the divine thing. It didn't matter from which part of India you were talking, whether God came and you were singing. You see, it was a completely different thing. But she also saw the other side of India when she was staying with a Tia lady in Kerala. And she went to Vadakanatha temple and she asked her to come along with her. And the lady said, no, I will not be allowed inside the temple. So both sides are there in India. And but if we could take what is the real India, where the music, the dance, the art forms, these have been considered to be divinity in themselves, something which doesn't have anything to do with any religion. And people who followed this, when they came from Islam, they were very devout Muslims. It was not as if they were changing their religion in any way. But at the same time, this identity with the art was something very different. So I feel that this book gives you a lot that remains with you. And I must congratulate Jyoti Sabharwal for giving you a book where you feel that you are talking to Kapilaji, who's there right in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we are slightly behind time, and I request the remaining two panelists to kindly consider initially speaking for 15 minutes each. Professor Om Cherry, please.
I'm happy that I've been asked to finish within 15 minutes because I didn't have to much to say. When I was asked to participate as a panelist in this today's discussion, I was really surprised how she got my name. I did not know the author, nor did I publish it, but I knew the subject of the biography. So anyway, I was very happy that I was asked to be part of this. But I'm happier today when I found my ignorance of this, the cognitive biography. I also did not know what it was. But when the English professor said he also did not know, I was very happy that my ignorance was not merely cognitive. It was not a cognitive problem with me. It was a genuine. But I was not convinced with the explanation of Leela Venkataraman either about cognition. Anyway, I thought that she used the term cognitive, because it was largely based on, probably exclusively based on, the long interviews that she had from Kapila Vatsyayan. That's a great privilege. For 4 years of continuous exposure to her interview, that's very great. I really appreciate the author because he could get 4 years of continuous exposure from Kapilaji, which is very, very rare and hard. But this cognitive problems, but when I heard the name, Afloat a Lotus Leaf, that title itself sounded something familiar with me. The Afloat a Lotus Leaf. What is that? Then I found it is familiar because I remembered the Sanskrit word, Padmapatra Vivampasa. That is from Bhagavad Gita, Padmapatra Vivampasa. That's the exact translation of this. That is from the Karma Yoga, Karma Sannyasa Yoga. And absolutely it tallied with the attitude of the subject of this biography, Kapila Vatsyayan. She herself mentioned somewhere in the interview, long interview, that create your work but don't get attached. But Karma Sannyasa Yoga says work but don't get attached. But this, her definition, I found was a great improvement. Create your work, don't get attached. That is the real meaning of Karma Sannyasa Yoga. Create your work, not do your work. And that is what she said in one of the interview, which I noticed. That is the real attitude of Kapila Vatsyayan in her work. Now, I based my observation exclusively on this book. On the eve of Kapilaji's going to America, Acharya Vasudev gave her 3 gifts, 3 idols, 3 images. One was Parvati of Ahishchatra, Buddha of Sarnath, Moti was Sursundari of Karanjahu. And very thoughtfully this Acharya gave it to her. And she was quite ignorant of all this. See, from that stage, from that period when she was given this gift, and this Acharya told her very prophetically, Kapila, you may study what you wish to do in USA, but keep these images in your room. Whenever you get time, you look at them, though not consciously. One day they would unfold another world before you. See, this was a prophetic word of the Acharya. Keep these images. At that time, she did not know what it was. He said, keep these images with you. One day it will talk to you. It will open a new world for you. This is exactly what happened. The emergence of Kapila Vatsyayan, the transformation of Kapila Vatsyayan from the person who did not know Ananda Kumar Swami's work at that time. When Acharya Vasudeva asked her, she was not familiar with the work of Abhinaya Darpanam. She was not familiar. But from that point, in a few years, she became a great scholar, not only in Abhinaya Darpanam, in Indian arts. How was it possible? She had that pull when she knew that she was aware that there was a lot of things she was not aware of. When she went to America, all the time she was aware of what she was not aware of. And this pull backward, perhaps when she, on her way to America, it was mentioned in the book, she saw an exhibition in London where a Chola bronze Kodandarama was there. And she couldn't understand that. It's a bronze statue, but that's all. But all this, she became a person who did not understand all this at that time. But this pull was her backward. She should understand. She should know what is this. This Acharya Vasudeva's words, one day you will understand. And that was stirring her mind. In USA, in Ann Arbor, where she was a student, she cut short her fellowship. She could have continued for 4 years. She cut short. She wanted to come back to India to learn, to get awareness of what she was not aware. And she cut short. Her professors were shocked and did not know why she was going back. They wanted to give her all facilities, but she said, no, I have to go back. Why did she come back? It was only this great pull towards India, towards this culture, a culture which she knew was great, but she did not know what greatness it was. That was the transformation. From that point, she comes back to India. And see, this is a great romantic story. She said, this is a great drama of life. And the first chapter itself, the rock salt of character, the first chapter of the book, rock salt of character is what, in a Sanskrit drama it's called Vishkampa. A Vishkampa encapsulates all the ingredients of the future chapters, future acts. And this first chapter contains all that's going to unfold in 16 chapters. I'm not describing all these chapters, but I have gone through all these chapters one after another, how she has unfolded this. The unfolding of her character, her approach, her learning, her awareness, what made Kapila Vatsyayan, we could see in the 16 chapters, from unaware of the Indian traditions, Indian culture, coming back, becoming aware of everything about Indian culture, Indian arts, folk arts as well as classical arts. There was nothing which she did not want to learn. She moved from south, east. She moved all over India to learn every folk art, every classical art. And this is perhaps an exciting experience for a person. From only the anxiety know and the awareness that I don't know. From that point, going from place to place, she has written extensively about the art forms of India, which perhaps many people didn't know till she revealed. I know she wrote about the arts of Kerala Kshetra, a very monumental book, Arts of Kerala Kshetra, about 120 arts, folk arts as well as classical arts. She has included in that. And no one else could see, including the mural paintings. Her study of the mural paintings of Kerala was so complete, so massive, and which I could not see anywhere else. And this is what Kapila Vatsyayan has done about everything. She calls Kshetra, Kerala Kshetra, Assam Kshetra. This all, Kshetra means an entity, a cultural entity. And all these regions she considers as a Kshetra with separate cultural traits. But she was the one who promoted the idea of the oneness of culture with all these differences, the plurality. there's one corporate culture in this country. She promoted that idea and she wrote about this again and again. She wrote about not only Assam's art, the bronzes of Assam. I have never read about that anywhere else. And a number of articles she wrote about the art forms of different states. Each state is a separate kshetra for her. And perhaps she is one person who has seen Bharata Kshetra as one corporate identity, one place where all this merge. That is the greatest of a person who understood minutely all the arts of India and to relate the inter-state relationship in the arts, the plurality together forming the corporate, the wholeness. This is what she has done. And as Vasudeva said, one day you will discover the world. She discovered the world of art. And once she discovered the world of art, she began to live there. She did not live that world. That was a world she discovered. And she lived in that world, continued to live in that world. And not only that, the glory of that world, the fascinations of that world, the charm of that world, she shared with others. This is one great thing. Not only that she knew the charms of the world, the glory of that world which she discovered, she very effectively shared these charms with others. And I don't think that there is any other scholar, living scholar, who has contributed so much for the promotion of Indian arts. Not only the classical arts, classical and folk, any folk art of any part of India. I have read extensively of Kapila Vatsyayan's studies. Take any art, some of the minor arts of some region, she has studied. She has put in the proper perspective what it is and connected it with the classical art forms with which it is concerned, it's connected. This is her contribution. And her contribution to the cultural the diplomacy, this is all described in this book. Cultural diplomacy, she has devoted a lot of space for cultural diplomacy. About the largest space has been devoted to that. But one serious drawback of the book, I should say that the greatest contribution of Kapila Vatsyayan is not this cultural contribution, but her contribution about the bringing up the folk arts and the classical arts of various regions and their interrelationships, the various elements of classical and folk arts, and that should form, as I mentioned, the Kerala Kshetra, the arts of Kerala Kshetra, where the folk arts and classical arts, everything. She has written extensively about all this region, but that is significantly absent in this book. I think the great contribution of Kapila Vatsyayan in bringing together and projecting all the great arts as well as the less great arts, all this together, which is her greatest contribution, I think, to the art study of in this country. That should form a major part of this study when she undertakes a revision of this. But there's a serious omission. That's what I thought. That she has devoted a lot of space. I don't want to. My 15 minutes is over. I don't want to say I'm very obedient person.
You still have time.
So I will go on speaking because I know Kapila Vatsyayan and her work. I have written much of her work, and that's why I immediately agreed I will come. But thing is, knowing her contribution to the Indian culture, perhaps this is only a minor. This massive book is only a minor contribution. But there's a lot more to be included in the book to make it complete. I wish that the listeners are provoked to learn more about that and to read the book to understand what else has to be there to make it complete, knowing Kapila Vatsyayan. And I wish that I congratulate the author for the massive work she has done and the kind of the gradual transformation of to depict the gradual transformation of Kapilaji from the eve of her going to America and coming back, and the transformation, how it was possible for a person to have this transformation. That is the Kapilaji that emerges out of this book. The emergence of Kapilaji, the great artist, great scholar, and great rebellious leader. That's another thing, the rebel in Kapilaji. There are some rebel elements shown in this book. That's another trait which Kapilaji still maintains. And I'm very happy that Kapilaji is what she is. The old Kapilaji still maintains that fervor. And I again congratulate the author for this. Thank you very much.
I hope the author Jyoti Sabharwal has noted the missing links and the revised edition, the folk arts. There are references there, but not in the manner in which Press Home Cherry is wanting it. Yes. Ambassador Raghunath, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, the Kapila Vatsyayan story has been retold with such eloquence and detail and in such an entertaining and captivating manner during the last hour that I think the chairman might want to declare the fourth speaker redundant. Nonetheless, I'll say my piece very briefly, maybe a 10-minute soundbite, if you like. First of all, comment on the book itself. There's nothing much to add to what has been said, but of course I would like to reiterate to add my voice to all the appreciation and applause for Dr. Vatsyayan's life and work, and of course thanks and felicitations to the author. Now, one can't possibly leave this room without taking a shot at this cognitive biography business. And I think I have, now if you'll pardon me, I have a more spiritual kind of thesis to offer, and I think some PhD thesis is probably in the offing. Maybe Dr. Jyoti Sabharwal will write it under the supervision of Professor Harish Trivedi. But seriously, if you just listen to me for a minute, I think the cognitive bit is explained as follows. You see, this book is an inspired work, and what is the theme that inspires it? I mean, what I see as the theme that inspires the book is a quest or a search for the source and the roots. That's what I see. And what does it mean? Now, this quest and discovery theme I see it as distinct from what you see in the Western world, where there is a return to the roots by those who are alienated and uprooted and lost. In this case, the person concerned is very much in the milieu. The roots and the source are actually around you. So what does it involve? What is involved is a quest for finding a fully clear perception, and if you like, cognition of what this source and the roots are all about, and what this milieu is all about. I don't know if this explanation satisfies anybody, but this is what I see. Because this is the dictionary definition of cognition. Anyway, you can treat it as this facile, but I just want to leave this thought with you. You see, I'm reminded of Isaac Newton, I think, who's given a very good comment on this whole business of a quest. He says that scientists don't discover anything new. They only lift the veil on God's creation. Of course, you can take the God bit out of this if you like, but this is a valid description of what, to me it seems, what this quest is all about. And the other point, Vohra Sahib had mentioned this book being a history, a cultural history of an age. I think this is very appropriate because it is very much a history of the times. And what times? Because it's an age of heroism and patriotism. I mean, not that we have no heroes and patriots today, but here we have across the board display of great courage, great diligence on the part of the country. It involves, of course, the political personalities of the age, but also involves a cultural renaissance and a renaissance of science. And incidentally, it's interesting, there was a journal published under the chairmanship of Dr. P.C. Ray, Acharya Prafulla Chandra Rai, in which C.V. Raman and S.N. Bose and Jagdish Chandra Bose and Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, all these people are involved. And the journal of this association, the Indian Association for the Advancement of Science, was called Science and Culture. I mean, that's why all these gentlemen were called acharyas. So this is the age that we are talking about. And of course, one of the sense that you get from the book is there's kind of nostalgia for that past. This was a kind of gentle age, perhaps. But I'm not sure whether neither the author nor Dr. Vatsyayan will really want to portray that age as nostalgic. I think everything in the book is really oriented to the present and the future. Now, the other thing about the book is, of course, it's very readable and eminently readable, and in some ways it reads like a Russian novel. The characters come to life very quickly, including those you know and those you do not know, and in between villains, between the lines also. And also it reads like a thriller, because after every page you wonder what next. So it adds to the quality of the book. But having said that, I must say that it's a very rigorous piece of work. And it reflects a lot of diligence and discipline. Apart from interviewing the subject of the book, there is enormous amount of work has obviously gone into putting all this together, for which again one must renew felicitations to the author. And I must add also that this is a book that needed to be written. Why? Not just because the subject is an iconic personality, but also because she's a person of great substance. And I would only say that I wish there was more recognition in this country of people of substance who are not necessarily iconic, who are all over the place in different walks of life, scholars certainly. And the first page of the book refers to this fraternity, or sorority, if you like, of people who sit in silence and work. And they're not exactly the mute, inglorious... they're not exactly mute, inglorious Miltons, the poet wrote about. These are all very vocal and articulate people. But I think this is a culture that we need to introduce. Now, in the little bit of time remaining to me, I think I should use it best in focusing on one aspect, which understandably has not been covered here. And this is what you call external cultural relations. Now, this is a bit of bureaucracies, but it's a convenient code word for multidimensional activity, including people-to-people interactions across countries, across boundaries, cultural diplomacy, which has been mentioned here, and the civilizational dialogue, internationalism, globalization, and a great deal else. And my remarks draw from this very happy circumstance of fairly continuous contact with Kapilaji over the last 40 years, I think, mainly in connection with her official work in the Ministry, Department of Education, Culture, IGNCA, and most recently the IIC Asia project. I shall say something about this shortly. And of course, I learned phenomenally without contributing very much to this enterprise, mainly because of a great quality which is featured pervasively in this book, of a very innate natural readiness to communicate and share our experience and our activities. Now, the setting for my remarks has already been provided in what has been said in the last hour. So I'll very briefly go to the main focus. Before that, I think one benchmark has to be provided for culture, because I'm talking about external cultural relations. And if I may do this, it seems to me that description or definition, which is in the text of culture given by Kapilaji, and which has been reproduced on the rear jacket of the book, which is, what is culture? And here, this is what it says. Culture is what you are in terms of your human relationships, and it lies in the essence when all else is lost. I would really, I would consider this as perhaps the definition that goes to the heart of the matter. And I suggest that culture in this large, all-pervasive construct is really akin to dharma and the law. And in fact, it's a foundation of society, nations, governance, institutions, systems, and so on. And I would also submit to you that this culture in this sense is a mainstay. It's a mainstay of national strength, dignity, and of national identity. So it needs nurturing, protection through all-round education. And the gift of samskaras, as quoted in the book, this is words from Dr. Kapila Vatsyayan, I would suggest it's not God-given, but it's the outcome of centuries of cultivation. I mean, all this is shorthand, but I think you know what I'm trying to convey, and I hope you agree with this. Now, the crucial importance given by Dr. Vatsyayan to external cultural relations is it grows out of this fundamental principle that the nurturing of national culture imperatively requires exposure and interaction with the outside world. So this is an exemplification of the spirit of Swami Vivekananda and Gandhiji, if you like, so that the totality of your national culture must be projected and you must be open to receiving inflows of culture from abroad. So this is a broad kind of template on which the whole enterprise of external cultural relations operates. I wanted to just flag very quickly the fact that all the interactions that Kapilaji set up right from the 50s onwards with countless cultural personalities, scholars, sometimes officials across the globe, in different parts of the world, I see two driving impulses at work. Qualities, really. One, of course, is efficiency, in fact, ruthless efficiency, for which he is well known. And secondly, I think most important, the human factor, because there is a kind of Midas touch, a magic X factor that enters the scene when Kapilaji seems to talk to these people. You see, they say in the English language, it's very difficult to charm a pearl out of an oyster. And unfortunately, oysters get killed when the pearl comes out of it. But she has the art of charming the pearl out of the oyster. So I think that's something that explains why, I mean, in my view, why so many people, I mean, I don't know, the number is myriad, and the book lists most of them, that so many people have developed a lifelong friendship and attachment, commitment, dedication, and so on to Dr. Vatsyayan, and also to involvement in India's cultural life. And it's a very long story, so I won't go into all that. But I wanted to touch very briefly, in maybe a 2-minute soundbite, on this whole thing about cultural diplomacy, soft diplomacy, and of course, this idea enunciated by her, which also is quoted here, that cultural diplomacy should be the foundation of overall diplomacy for foreign relations as a whole. I think this is a very profound and far-reaching idea. And I would also agree with her, with what she notes with a touch of sadness, I think, that we could have done something to actually operationalize this principle, and we did not over all these years because the right steps were not taken. I think there's a lot of truth in that. There's a little comment I want to add to that, because it is true that the world of cultural relations and the world of political and strategic relations, there is a connection between them very obviously, and thank God for that connection. But this connection is not direct or causal or linear. It's a little more complicated, and it's a sad thing to observe. It's more complicated because although one interacts on the other, they operate on parallel tracks. And I would only say that, let's say, to ensure your overall interests on the political and strategic level, the cultural level is a necessary condition. You have to invest in that. You have to really build that up. A strong national culture is necessary. But it is not a sufficient condition because, unfortunately, there are other factors, more sordid factors at work, which drive the world of politics and strategy. And the same consideration would apply to soft power, because soft power and soft diplomacy in the pristine sense which Kapilaji has enunciated, it is, I think, absolutely essential. But we have to take it out of the world of the strategists, because typically in this age, the Americans have coined this word soft power, and it's almost projected as some kind of Brahmastra, you see, a weapon of war. It's nothing of the kind, because it would seem to me that it is inherent in cultural diplomacy and soft power that they cannot be instrumental agendas. they are not weapons. They succeed to the extent that they reflect a value system, social values, reflect a genuine beauty, a genuine cultural excellence. And if it is not the case, then they fall flat on their face. And you see this at work, fortunately not in our country, but in some other places. At one point, Kapilaji quotes some official who's happily not named, who tells her that your how many 10 lakhs of culture is not worth one patent tank. This was in the 60s when the patent tank was around. I think this gentleman got it wrong, because what he should have said really, if he wanted to be hard-headed, is that you respect my patent tank and I respect your culture. But more than that, I think the interesting thing is that both of them have their own realm. I mean, the patent tank does its work and culture does its work. So render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God those that are God's. In any case, you might also note that the patent tank is in the scrap heap. Fortunately, culture is not. So I think that's the other comment. Lastly, about civilizational dialogue. I noticed that on page 371, and I would draw attention to that, there's a full page excerpt from one of the speeches made by Kapilaji at one of these dialogues, civilizational dialogues. And I think this is interesting because it is a kind of a, if I read it correctly, somewhat critic, a rather despairing statement. Because if I got it right, the essence of what she says is that it's a heartbreaking experience, because you engage in these dialogues and things seem to work very well for a while, and then it breaks down, and it doesn't, you're back to square one, nothing, there's no progress as such. I think this is a very accurate description of the whole process of civilizational dialogues. But having said that, I also read Kapilaji correctly, as quoted in the book. If I read her correctly, she says it's not a hopeless situation, because it is not a futile exercise. We come back to it in due course. On this whole enterprise, civilizational dialogue, in which she's been engaged so actively, especially in the context of Asia, I think one comment is probably relevant before I close, and it is the following. Common sense indicates that human beings, societies, and nations are really wired not just for aggression and contention, but also for cooperation and for reaching out to each other. I mean, this is obvious. And you see this at work in the civilizational dialogue. In fact, the very fact that people have been at it for maybe centuries, the European example is illustrative, because even as the Europeans were preparing for the great wars, there was a sincere attempt to build some kind of pan-Europeanism. And I mean, we talked recently, I had a discussion with Kapilaji about the novel Jean-Christophe. I mean, this musician who seeks to bridge the gap between France and Germany just a few years before they went to war. So all that having been said, you can see that it's a very vital force. But again, they work on parallel tracks, and one doesn't automatically affect the other. And the short point really is that tension and conflicts do not get reduced by automatically through a realization of civilizational affinities and commonalities. In fact, sometimes it's the other way around. And the chapter that is devoted to intercultural dialogue, I think the first 3 pages bring this out very clearly, because that chapter begins with the Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai phase. It makes it very clear that if what happens really is that one or either side feels that it's worth invoking cultural affinities, and so they get invoked. If one or either side feels that they should not be invoked, they're not invoked. So it's not a very happy situation, but that's the way it is. And ultimately, conflicts and tensions get resolved essentially. I mean, this again, I think it's a fact of life. As things are today, they get resolved when either one side dominates totally, or either side, both sides are in a state of exhaustion, and it's then that they start talking about civilizational dialogue. So that seems to be the picture. Lastly, the IIC Asia project. I wouldn't want to, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, want to end the story without reference to that, because I think it's been described as the flagship of the IIC. I hope the description is correct. But I want to narrate my own experience that it's a very worthwhile and dynamic project, and one must thank the trustees for their wisdom and foresight in, first of all, initiating this project and also ensuring that it continues. A question that was brought in there on whether Asia is a common civilization. Does it have enough cohesion? This question raised in the book, and it quotes Kapilaji on this subject. I think the short point is that despite all our divisions and the great complexity and disparities and all the cussedness and disputes, Asia is cohesive enough to be a unit for civilizational dialogue. And in fact, this applies also to South Asia and our extended neighborhood. And one shouldn't forget that, because sometimes the situation is so bleak, and there's nobody better to tell us about this than a distinguished chairman. But I won't go into that. But having said that, I would recall our old friend Jalaluddin Rumi. And if I got the maybe in paraphrase, that the tree is always looking for its roots. And if you go around our neighborhood and talk to everybody, there's nobody who will deny this, even our great neighbor to the west. But conditionalities are put. So the short point is we have to deal with those conditionalities for applying Rumi, but let us not forget Rumi. I mean, he still remains valid. So thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard the distinguished panelists. Each of them have spoken from his or her perspective, but spoken about the book and spoken about the biographed person. Thanks to Kapilaji, we had a very cultured evening. And thanks again to the cognition of the author, which added more to. Now, in the normal course in discussions like these, we have some time for question and answers. But I personally feel that after what you heard from the panelists, that there is not much scope for, unless somebody wishes to make some personal comments for a short while. Yes, please, at the back. Yes. Just a few minutes, not very long.
To me, personally speaking, this has been a vindication of what I have been trying to impress on her for a long time, many, many years, that her life and her experiences must be recorded. And now I'm so glad that not only they've been recorded, they have received extraordinary comments from a lot of people. Since many people here may not have read some of these comments, I take liberty of reading out a few sentences from a few. Pankaj Vohra wrote in the Sunday Guardian, Vatsyayan's personal history commingles with the history of post-independence India, and this voluminous tome would find a place on the shelves of administrators, diplomats, educationists, scholars, and creative artists. He also praises the biographer, publisher, saying that the book is a publishing coup of sorts, as Sabharwal has succeeded in breaking the silence of one of the most celebrated but reclusive scholars of modern India. Matthew George wrote in The Week, a cultural colossus of our times, Vatsyayan is almost a media recluse, preferring to express herself in peer circles. So readers must give credit to Sabharwal thrice for drawing Vatsyayan out, for providing a comprehensive collage of her life, and for making the volume eminently readable. While the erudite scholar Gopal Krishnan Gandhi termed it as an engaging biography in the Hindustan Times, Dr. Harish Trivedi of the Tribune perceived it as a nuanced history of Dr. Vatsyayan's intellectual journey, and that it is a book that you reflect on. A small aspect of my personal satisfaction mentioned in the initial 4 to 6 pages of the book are the generous compliments Kapilaji pays to my father, and especially my mother, Urmila Shastri, for the formative influence on her when she and her brother Keshav Malik went to live with them for a few years. Sabharwal quotes Kapilaji as attributing most of her human traits to this aunt, who was a renowned freedom fighter and died in 1942 after her second prison term. She writes, This aunt, in particular, was really responsible for molding her, that is Kapila, in budding years. Known for her dynamism, she thought her aunt was just wonder of wonders. Another aspect which, in my small contribution to the writing of this book, is that a substantial part was formulated at my mountain cottage in Mukteshwar, where I managed to persuade Kapilaji and Jyoti to spend a few weeks on 3 occasions. Before I conclude, I must mention 3 specific conversations that are recorded in this book. One is between Maulana Azad and Pandit Nehru, when Maulana Sahab disagreed with Panditji's concern about IAS officials being unhappy about academics being appointed as secretaries in the Ministry of Education. Maulana Sahab says firmly, Jawaharlal, तुम भी कभी कभी नामाकूल बात करते हो. ये तालीम का मामला है. यहाँ कोई पढ़ा लिखा शख्स होना चाहिए. And Panditji respected this view. For decades, the Secretary of the Ministry of Education was not an IAS officer. The other 2 conversations are between Maulana Sahab and Kapilaji. As Sabharwal quotes Kapilaji, who was being asked to seek some advice from the Director General of ASI on some issue. In an ignorant and, if I may say, arrogant manner, Kapilaji said, I will ask DG Chakravarti to come over. Maulana Sahab looked at her sternly and said, आप हिंदुस्तान की तहजीब के राजा के पास जाएंगी, उनको नहीं बुलाएंगी. ठंडा पानी पीजिए और लेफ्ट राइट कीजिए. Maulana Azad's approach to the relationship between the central ministry and the subordinate offices was a great learning for Kapila, because the persons who occupied these chairs were to be much respected and looked up to. And just because she was in the central ministry, those who were in charge of the museums, archaeology or libraries were not to be treated as subordinates. The other instance was when Maulana Sahab told Kapila, since you happen to know some Sanskrit, I think it would be a good idea to get Katha Upanishad translated into Persian and have it distributed in Iran. Much later, in course of her further visits to Tehran, she was pleasantly amazed to be asked questions about many aspects of Katha Upanishad by Iranian scholars. With his acute comprehension, Maulana Azad asked Kapilaji to have Kalidas play Shakuntala translated into Arabic, and the first few of these translations were distributed to libraries and institutions in West Asia. It was the vision of such leaders, affirms Kapilaji, that saw the primacy at the level of political negotiations, but all the efforts were in terms of how to establish an intellectual and cultural dialogue. Ever since, these conversations have been reverberating in my mind for their extraordinary meaning that holds enormous significance in the contemporary context. As many of the persons may not have read them yet, I have taken the liberty of quoting these excerpts from the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shatkumar. Well, ladies and gentlemen, all good things must come to an end. I would again compliment the author who was missing when I spoke initially. No, I learned that you were enjoying a traffic jam. And once again, on behalf of all of you present here today, to compliment Dr. Vatsyayan, to congratulate her, to greet her for a life meaningfully lived, for so much work done, so much that she is continuing to do even today, despite various factors pulling her back. And finally, my thanks to each one of the distinguished panelists for having spent time to read the book and to add further to the cognition of the author. Thank you very much.